Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever time you're watching this. Happy Thursday. You should be done with your bell ringer by now. If you haven't done it, go back and do it. If you didn't do your warm up, go back and do it. What are you doing? This is direct instruction. This is going to be the last thing we do today on Thursday. So you should be following along with whatever I'm typing up here on my screen. You should have the same document and be filling in the same blanks as we go through it. If you forget where to find it, it's written on your assignment. We talked about it Monday or Tuesday, but let me show you one more time. If you go over to classwork underneath week 1, we should be on Thursday guided notes. Give that a click, and it should pull up the same exact thing that's on my screen. So if I'm typing somewhere, you're typing the same thing in the same spot. All right, so let's get into it. On your bell ringer, you answered the question, what is the smallest unit of living things? What makes up all living things? And that would be cells. So if it is living, it is made up of a cell. We're made up of cells, plants are made up of cells. This piece of corn that's eventually going to be in your Chipotle, if you zoom in, it is made up of cells. Everything, by the way, that we talk about today is something that you should have learned in the past. We're getting warmed up. I'm pulling out stuff that you would have learned with L. Sanders in 6th grade. So if it sounds familiar, you're not going crazy. It is familiar. So moving on, a cell is the, like we already said, smallest unit of any organism or living thing. Organism is just a fancy way of saying this is something that's alive and is made up of a bunch of organs, like your heart, your brain, your lungs, your stomach. That's an organism. Now there are 2 different types of cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Again, you might be thinking, I think I've heard this word before. Maybe you're like, lady, she's talking crazy. I have no idea what she's saying. They look like they're intimidating words, but they're easy if you break it down. Pro, like pro basketball player. Carry, like you're carrying something. And otic. Same thing over here. You, like you, carry otic. Pretty easy. So what is the difference between these 2 types of cells? What are we talking about here? So when we're talking about prokaryotes, or living things that have prokaryotic cells, they are unicellular, which means single cell. They only have one cell, unicellular. Now, what living things are unicellular? We have bacteria, as we can see right here, just swimming around, or archaea. Archaea is similar to bacteria. We don't need to know too many details about it. Just know that it's something super small like bacteria and you need a microscope to see it. It's more than likely a prokaryote. Not always, but more than likely it's prokaryotic. Now the second kind, let me move myself over here, is the eukaryotes. Things that are eukaryotic or have eukaryotic cells. They are usually, not always, but usually multicellular. So they are made up of multi means multiple, cells. Easy. So what type of living things are eukaryotic? Well, first we have animals, which we count as animals. So like us, lions, tigers, bears, whatever, they are eukaryotic. Even Flo Millie, she's eukaryotic. Also plants, so the grass outside, the trees, they have eukaryotic cells. And fungi or fungus. So like mushrooms is a fungus. They have eukaryotic cells. If you have fungus growing on the bottom of your feet, I'm sorry for you, please keep that to yourself, but that's living and it's eukaryotic. So what else is different about pro and eukaryotic cells? We're going to skip these top lines for now. We're going to move on to the middle part. Here it says membrane-bound organelles. What is all of that? Well, organelles, you may or may not remember, those are the small parts of the cells that have a specific job. That's your nucleus, the mitochondria. We know that's the powerhouse of the cell. I know you guys know that. Ribosomes, anything in the cell that plays a specific role. Prokaryotic cells don't have any of those. So no membrane-bound organelles. When it says membrane-bound, we're going to talk about the cell membrane on the next slide, but that just means they're connected to a part of the cell. They don't have any of those. So this right here, if you see a picture of a cell that looks a lot like this, it kind of looks pill-shaped. It's like a long cylinder. Sometimes it has a little tail at the end. That's what most prokaryotic cells are going to look like. So if you see a picture like that, you know I'm looking at a prokaryote, I'm looking at bacteria. If you go over here to eukaryotes, they do have membrane-bound organelles. So let's type has membrane-bound organelles. So they do have the nucleus, they do have the mitochondria, the ribosomes. Our cells have all of those special little parts working inside of them. Now going back over to prokaryotes, they have no nucleus. Nucleus is a type of organelle. You may or may not remember, we often refer to the nucleus as the brain of the cell. It's what holds all of that important information that your body needs. So your nucleus is kind of the big boss of your body. It knows what's going on. So prokaryotes have no nucleus, eukaryotes do have a nucleus. Easy way to remember what type of cell has this stuff, what type of cell doesn't. If you think right up here, pro rhymes with no. So pro, no. They have no membrane-bound organelles. They have no nucleus. And I misspelled nucleus. There we go. So pro means no. Eu rhymes with do. So eukaryotes do have membrane-bound organelles. They do have a nucleus. Easy way to remember the difference. All right, very last slide over here. So even though they have a lot that is different about them, they do have some similarities. So they both have DNA. Now we're going to talk a lot more about DNA next week. We're going to learn a lot about it. We're going to get super into it. Right now, all you need to know is that the DNA is kind of like, think of it as like a recipe for everything that's going on in your body. So how we said the nucleus has all that important information, all that information is written down on your DNA. So both eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells have DNA. Eukaryotes, the more complex looking one with a lot more going on, they keep theirs in the nucleus. Like we said, the brain of the cell. And you can see right here, this little nucleus, and I pointed an arrow so you can see where that would be on the cell. Those little spirally things look like noodles. That's your DNA. So they're all packed in to that nucleus. Now prokaryotes, their DNA, if you look over here, this little, it kind of looks like red spaghetti. That's their DNA. It's not really kept inside a specific part of the cell. They're just kind of floating freely. So even though they're kept in two different places, both cells have it. They also both have something called cytoplasm. Make that bigger. So cytoplasm is just, like it says here, the fluid that surrounds the organelles. So you can see we have all of this blue stuff filled in. Same thing with the prokaryotic cell, all this blue stuff around all of that DNA. It's kind of like Jell-O, I think is a good way to think of it. It just kind of keeps things fluid-y, but not like just floating all over the place. They kind of keep them steady. Just picture Jell-O. They both also have a, let's see here, cellular membrane. Make that a little bit bigger. Perfect. So last blank, cellular membrane. So what does that mean? That is your protective layer that acts as a barrier between the inside and outside of the cell. So it's also kind of fluidy, but it just kind of, it's kind of like the gatekeeper. Like it says, this can't come into the cell, this can't leave the cell, this can come into the cell, this can go. It has that protection. Both prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells have that protective barrier. So they both have that in common. All right, so quick review. All living things are made of cells, two different types of cells. We have prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are typically what bacteria and things called archaea have. They're pretty similar. Eukaryotic cells belong to animals, plants, fungi, people. Pro, remember, rhymes with no organelles, no nucleus. Eukaryotes rhymes with do, U rhymes with do. They do have organelles, they do have a nucleus. Both types of cells have that DNA, except eukaryotes keep it in the nucleus. They both have cytoplasm, or that fluid jello-like stuff around the organelles, and they both have that protective layer, that cellular membrane. All right, so you should have every blank filled in. All you have to do is, on your classwork, make sure you hit turn in so I can see that you finished it by the deadline. And once you've done that, you are done for the day. See you tomorrow.